Americans find a lot of things to fight about, but the fact that we only have one planet is one thing that we can't argue. But for some reason, the idea that our planet is changing is in fact incredibly controversial. But the facts are pointing to an ever-warming planet, affecting everything from ocean life to human migratory patterns. But even those who agree that the climate is changing don't necessarily have a complete view on the severity or forms that carbon emissions and human contributions create for our planet. In this video, we're going to explore 5 things you might not have known about climate change, ranging from unknown problems to untapped solutions. But first, let's talk about something we're all familiar with. Water, specifically the 97% of it that currently exists in our oceans. 10% of the world's population is dependent on fisheries, and 40% of the US population lives in high-density coastal areas. Needless to say, any change in our oceans will have global ramifications. Bringing us to our first fact. Hotter water holds less oxygen, and as the oceans absorb more heat to compensate for rising temperatures, the oceans are undergoing deoxygenization. You might have known that the oceans are a big regulator of the world's temperatures because they absorb a lot of heat, but did you know that absorption comes at the cost of water being able to hold less oxygen? This is bad news for fish like tuna, marlin, and sharks, all of which are sensitive to low oxygen in the water. These bigger fish have a few options: die or swim to shallower waters, which might not be ideal for that Florida beach trip you've been planning, unless you want to spend it next to Mr. Great White. It also means that these fish are more vulnerable to overfishing, an issue really important to consider when 4.3 billion people globally rely on fish for a significant portion of their protein. Number 2, hot water takes up more space. It's called thermal expansion. And while you know that our ice caps and glaciers are melting, contributing to higher sea levels, what you might not realize is that the heat in our oceans actually makes the water expand. So not only are we getting tons of new water, we are also making that water take up more space, which only exacerbates the issue of rising sea levels. Due to this rise, by 2050, it's expected that $106 billion worth of property will actually be underwater. 8 of the world's 10 largest cities reside in coastal areas, and if the sea level rises too drastically, that spells a disaster of relocation. Number 3, in the game of food production, some will win and some will lose big. The rising temperatures don't mean everyone is going to suffer equally. In fact, some areas will see greater crop yields, but this could lead to a humanitarian crisis that undoes much of the work that has gone into trying to bridge the gap between developed and underdeveloped nations. There's not much more to say, other than some people will be able to eat and others won't. Number 4, there are natural solutions. Literally. Do you know what pulls carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere? Plants. And tropical forests in particular actually provide 30% of action needed to prevent worst climate change scenarios. Yet we only devote 2% of funding to natural-based solutions, even though they've proven most effective. And finally, number 5, people are more open to those solutions than you might think. Due to a political divide in our nation, many assume that people across the aisle are unable to acknowledge climate change. But 2 studies might have shown once and for all that this is untrue. In fact, 78% of rural Americans believe that we need to take action now to reduce the pollution that is causing climate change. And 80% of rural Nebraskans agree that more should be done to develop solar and wind energy in Nebraska. Still, because of this adversarial political divide, people do not realize that they actually agree on something.
I think some people are just kind of ignoring climate change because of party affiliation, because some people higher up within the party are ignoring it or just refuse to believe in it, look at the evidence. And I think if people are willing to just take a look at it for themselves or, just listen for a second to what other people are saying, we might be able to make some changes.
I think that there should be more bipartisanship than there currently is, because at the moment there's this strange sort of war on truth where it's climate change is happening, but half the people say that it's either not or not as big of a deal as it actually is in order to I don't know, win votes or stay in the favor of people who they view as more important, and I think that that's really dangerous.